"You really think you can stop us?" That was the last line my mother sent before she went to bed, followed by a laughing emoji that somehow felt colder than any insult she had ever thrown at me. 3 days later, she was screaming my name over the phone while police sirens echoed in the background, demanding to know why 32 members of our extended family were being escorted away from my lake house like trespassers. By then, it was already far too late. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 35 years old, and I work as a senior cybersecurity consultant based in Chicago. Every day, companies hire me to anticipate threats before they happen, to identify vulnerabilities that everyone else overlooks, and to build systems strong enough to withstand people who believe the rules do not apply to them. Ironically, the hardest people I ever had to defend myself against were not anonymous hackers hiding behind computer screens. They were my own parents. The message arrived at exactly 3:07 on a Tuesday morning. I had just finished reviewing a lengthy security audit for a healthcare client and finally crawled into bed. My apartment was silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner. I reached for my phone only because the repeated vibration refused to stop. The notifications were pouring in from our family group chat. I opened the conversation, expecting another chain of meaningless jokes or photographs from one of my distant cousins. Instead, the first message came from my father. "Family reunion this Friday. 5 days at your lake house. 32 people confirmed." I frowned, assuming I had misread it. Before I could process the sentence, another notification appeared, this time from my mother. "Make sure you stock the refrigerator before everyone arrives. Jason wants those expensive ribeye steaks, and don't forget plenty of seafood for Saturday." Then another. "Leave the keys to your SUV inside the kitchen. Your brother needs it to pull the boat." Another. "We'll probably need extra folding tables. Buy them before Thursday." Another. "Oh, and don't disappear into work. This vacation is for family." Not a single sentence ended with a question. Not one message asked whether I was available. Not one person wondered if I had already made plans. They had simply announced that my home, my vehicle, my vacation property, and my time now belonged to them. As I continued scrolling, cousins I barely recognized began replying with excited messages about fishing trips, bonfires, wine tastings, and sunset boat rides. Several of them thanked my parents for organizing such a generous getaway. One aunt even wrote, "Claire always loved sharing." I stared at the screen in complete silence. The lake house they discussed so casually was not a family property. It had never belonged to my parents. They had never contributed a dollar toward the down payment. Every monthly mortgage payment had come from my account. Every renovation, every piece of furniture, every dock repair, every insurance premium, every property tax bill carried only one name: mine. The place represented nearly 8 years of relentless work, late nights, missed holidays, and consulting contracts that often required 80-hour weeks. Yet reading those messages, anyone would have assumed it belonged to Richard and Susan Bennett. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Several replies immediately came to mind. I could remind everyone who legally owned the property. I could tell them I had never agreed to host anyone. I could ask why they continued treating my life as if it were community property. But experience had taught me something painfully simple. People who ignore boundaries rarely begin respecting them because you explain yourself more clearly. Then my mother's final message appeared. "You really think you can stop us?" Followed by a laughing emoji. I looked at the blinking cursor on my screen. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I typed a single word. "Okay." I pressed send. Within seconds, dozens of thumbs-up reactions flooded the chat. Jason responded with a string of laughing emojis. My father wrote, "That's more like it." They believed I had surrendered. They believed another one of their demands had been accepted without resistance. They had absolutely no idea that while they were celebrating a free 5-day vacation, I had already decided that this would be the last time anyone in my family ever mistook my silence for weakness. People like to believe that family loyalty is built on love. In my family, it was built on usefulness. As long as I solved problems, paid bills, stayed quiet, and never questioned anyone's decisions, I was considered a good daughter. The moment I acted like I owned something of my own, I became selfish. Looking back, I should have seen the text messages coming years before they actually arrived. The lake house was never just another vacation property to me. It was proof that my life belonged to me and no one else. I bought it 3 years earlier after completing one of the largest cybersecurity infrastructure projects of my career. For nearly 18 months, I had barely slept. My team protected financial institutions against coordinated ransomware attacks across multiple states, and the bonuses from that contract became the down payment on the property I had dreamed about since I was a little girl. Nestled along the quiet shoreline of Lake of the Ozarks, the house was everything I wanted my life to become. Large windows overlooked the water. A private dock stretched into the calm blue lake. Tall oak trees surrounded the property, making it feel peaceful even during the busiest summer weekends. Every room reflected choices I had made myself, from the stone fireplace to the handmade wooden dining table that overlooked the sunset. No one in my family had helped me buy it. Not financially, not emotionally, not even with a single congratulatory phone call. In fact, my father laughed when I first mentioned the purchase. A second home? Richard Bennett scoffed over dinner. People like us don't waste money on luxury toys. My mother nodded immediately. Jason could use that money to expand his business instead. Jason. Everything somehow circled back to my older brother. If Jason wanted a new truck, my parents found a reason why he deserved it. If Jason started another business that collapsed within 6 months, someone else was blamed. If Jason forgot birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, or family obligations, everyone insisted he was simply too busy. By contrast, my successes were always treated as accidents or obligations. When I graduated at the top of my computer engineering class, my father said I had simply chosen an easy major. When I received my first 6-figure promotion, my mother reminded everyone that Jason had better people skills. When I purchased the lake house, they congratulated themselves instead. "We always taught you to save money," my mother proudly told relatives during Thanksgiving. I almost laughed. They had never taught me financial discipline. They had taught me survival. Growing up, Jason rarely kept a job longer than a year. Credit cards mysteriously disappeared into collections. Car payments were missed. Personal loans somehow became family emergencies. Every crisis eventually landed on my shoulders. "Claire, you're responsible. Claire, you have the stable career. Claire, you're the only one who can help." Those sentences became so common that I stopped hearing them as requests. They sounded more like permanent job descriptions. About 7 years ago, Jason called me crying because one of his restaurant investments had failed. He needed $18,000 immediately or he would lose everything. I wired the money the same afternoon. He promised to repay every cent within 6 months. He never paid back a single dollar. Instead, my parents praised his determination for trying to become an entrepreneur while quietly reminding me that family should never keep score. 2 years later, they expected me to contribute toward Jason's destination wedding because the bride's family had expensive expectations. Then came his honeymoon. Then legal fees after another failed business venture. Then credit card debt. Every emergency somehow belonged to everyone except Jason. Meanwhile, whenever I accomplished something meaningful, the conversation changed within minutes. No one asked how difficult my projects had been. No one wanted to hear about promotions or international clients. Someone always redirected the attention back to my brother. It took me years to understand that I was never viewed as an individual. I was simply the family's emergency fund with a heartbeat. The lake house disrupted that arrangement. It represented something they could not control, a place they had never paid for, a symbol that I had built an independent life despite spending years cleaning up everyone else's mistakes. That was exactly why they felt entitled to it. In their minds, nothing I owned truly belonged to me. It belonged to the family. They simply hadn't realized that while they were planning their 5-day vacation, I had already stopped being the daughter who existed to rescue everyone else. The strange thing about entitlement is that it grows in silence. Every time you tolerate it, people become convinced they deserve even more the next time. By 8 o'clock that Tuesday morning, my family group chat had become almost unrecognizable. When I had gone to bed a few hours earlier, there were fewer than 20 unread messages. Now there were over 160. I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened my laptop for work, and watched the notifications continue arriving every few seconds. No one was discussing whether they should go to my lake house. They were discussing how they planned to use it. Aunt Linda wants the upstairs master bedroom. We'll need at least 4 coolers for drinks. Who's bringing fishing gear? I call the bedroom with the lake view. One cousin uploaded a grocery list. Another volunteered to organize a poker tournament. Someone suggested renting jet skis. Another person replied that there was no need because Claire can pay for that. The message collected half a dozen laughing reactions. Then Jason entered the conversation. My buddies might swing by Saturday. A few seconds later, he corrected himself. Actually, probably 6 or 7 guys. Nobody objected. Nobody asked whether I had enough room. Nobody asked whether strangers were welcome. My mother immediately replied, "Perfect. Claire's place is huge." Claire's place. She acknowledged it belonged to me only when she needed to describe its size. Otherwise, it was always referred to as the family lake house. I continued scrolling. One of my younger cousins asked whether everyone should split food expenses. Before I could even appreciate the question, my father answered, "Claire has it covered." Another laughing emoji. Another flood of thumbs up. My coffee had already gone cold. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something much quieter. Clarity. It was impossible to misunderstand what was happening anymore. This wasn't poor communication. This wasn't excitement getting out of hand. This was expectation. An expectation that my resources existed for everyone's convenience. While another wave of messages arrived, I minimized the chat and joined my first client meeting of the day. For nearly 2 hours, I reviewed cybersecurity compliance reports with executives from 3 different states. No one interrupted me. No one demanded favors. Everyone respected my time because they were paying for it. Ironically, complete strangers valued my boundaries more than the people who had known me my entire life. When the meeting ended, my phone immediately buzzed again. Mom calling. I let it ring. She called again and again. Finally, she left a voicemail. "Claire, answer your phone. We need to finalize sleeping arrangements." Not ask. Finalize. As though I were an employee who had forgotten to complete an assigned task. Minutes later, Jason called. I ignored him too. His voicemail was shorter. "Hey, don't be weird. Just make sure the boat has gas before Friday." Then another text appeared. "That, we'll probably need extra patio chairs. Buy another dozen." No greeting. No please. Just another instruction. I looked around my apartment. The morning sunlight poured through the windows. My calendar was completely booked until late afternoon. In less than 48 hours, I was scheduled to fly to Denver for a security conference before driving to the lake house for a quiet weekend alone. At least, that had been my original plan. No one had bothered asking whether I already had plans, because in their minds, my schedule existed only until they decided otherwise. I opened the family chat one final time. Someone had started assigning bathrooms. Another cousin wanted to know whether children could bring inflatable pools. Jason asked if anyone minded loud music after midnight. My mother responded before anyone else could. "It's Claire. She never complains." I stared at those 4 words for several seconds. She never complains. She wasn't describing my personality. She was describing my role. Stay quiet. Pay the bill. Solve the problem. Repeat. That sentence explained nearly every interaction I'd had with my family for the last 15 years. The old version of me would have typed a long message explaining why this wasn't acceptable. She would have reminded everyone that the property belonged to me. She would have defended herself. She would have hoped that logic could fix people who had never respected limits. But that version of Claire Bennett no longer existed. Instead, I locked my phone. I opened a different contact list. This one didn't include relatives. It included professionals. People who honored contracts instead of assumptions. People who understood ownership instead of entitlement. I smiled for the first time that morning as my finger hovered over the name of the first person I needed to call. If my family wanted to spend 5 unforgettable days at my lake house, they were about to get exactly what they deserved. The most dangerous plans never begin with dramatic speeches. They begin with ordinary phone calls that nobody else thinks are important. I waited until lunchtime before making the first one. Not because I needed time to calm down. I was already calm. I simply wanted my family to believe they still had complete control over the situation. While they spent the morning arguing over bedrooms and barbecue menus, I quietly opened my calendar and canceled my trip to Denver. The conference could wait. This couldn't. I closed my work laptop, picked up another phone that I used for business matters, and dialed the first number. "Good afternoon, Harrison Legal Group." "Hi," I said. "This is Claire Bennett. I need to review a property access issue." The receptionist transferred me to an attorney named Michael Harrison. Within 15 minutes, he understood everything. Actually, almost everything. I deliberately left out the emotional parts. Lawyers don't need family history. They need facts. "I own the property." "Yes. I have never invited these people." "Correct. They've announced they're coming anyway." "Yes. They're bringing 32 guests." There was a brief pause. Then he quietly asked, "Do they have any written permission from you?" "No." "Excellent. Excellent." It was probably the first time anyone had ever described my family's behavior with that word. Michael wasn't celebrating the conflict. He simply understood that clear documentation creates clear legal boundaries. He spent the next 20 minutes explaining my options. Every answer sounded surprisingly simple. Property ownership, access rights, written authorization, trespassing procedures, civil liability. Everything I needed already existed. I simply had never imagined using it against my own parents. After hanging up, I made another call. This time to Lakeside Property Management, the company that occasionally maintained my dock during the winter. A familiar voice answered. "Claire. Long time no see." "Hi, Donna. I need a favor." "What happened?" "I'm going to have unexpected visitors." She laughed. "Family?" I smiled despite myself. "Something like that." Within 10 minutes, we had arranged for a private security company that frequently worked alongside their maintenance crews during large events. Professional, licensed, insured, no drama. Exactly what I wanted. After ending the call, I drove to my bank during my lunch break. Not because I needed money, because I wanted copies. Certified ownership records, insurance documents, vehicle registrations, property tax statements. Every document carrying one unmistakable name. Claire Elizabeth Bennett. No trusts, no shared ownership, no family partnership. Just me. The banker handed me a thick envelope before wishing me a nice afternoon. She had no idea she was helping prepare for the strangest family reunion of my life. Driving back to my apartment, my phone buzzed continuously. Jason, Mom, Dad, the family group chat, voicemails, photos, restaurant recommendations. Someone wanted to know whether my outdoor television supported college football streaming. Another cousin wondered if I had enough wine glasses for everyone. No one noticed that I hadn't replied in hours. They assumed silence meant agreement. That assumption had protected them for years. Now it was protecting me. Back at my apartment, I spread every document across my dining table. Ownership certificate, mortgage records, insurance policy, survey map, vehicle title. Everything was organized into neat folders. Not because I expected a courtroom, because organization had always been my way of reducing chaos. Then I opened my laptop again, this time not for work. I logged into the lake house security system, 8 exterior cameras, 4 indoor cameras covering entrances, smart locks, remote access, garage controls, boat dock monitoring. I had installed the entire system myself after buying the property. Ironically, my parents had mocked me for spending so much on security. Who would ever break into a lake house? My father had laughed. Apparently, people who believed they already owned it. I updated passwords, generated new access codes, disabled every temporary guest profile, changed administrator credentials. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. When I finished, every digital key my family had ever used instantly became worthless. No alarms sounded. No notifications were sent. Nothing appeared different. That was exactly the point. The strongest security measures are usually invisible. As evening approached, one final message appeared in the family chat. My mother had posted a countdown graphic. Only 2 more days until our vacation. Dozens of relatives reacted with hearts, fireworks, and smiling faces. I looked at the screen for several seconds before locking my phone once again. They thought I was doing nothing. They believed my silence meant surrender. In reality, every quiet hour brought them one step closer to walking directly into a trap they had built entirely with their own assumptions. By Thursday afternoon, my family had completely stopped checking whether I was cooperating. They had reached something far more dangerous than confidence. They had reached certainty. The family group chat looked less like a conversation and more like the itinerary for a luxury vacation. Jason proudly announced that he had borrowed a smoker for the barbecue competition. One aunt uploaded a shopping list totaling nearly $2,000. Another cousin created a schedule for fishing tournaments, bonfires, movie nights, and a family photo session on the dock. My mother assigned people to clean our lake house after everyone left, as if delegating chores somehow made the invasion acceptable. The most revealing message came from my father. I've already told everyone to arrive around 10 Friday morning. Claire probably won't get there until later anyway. That sentence made me smile. He thought he understood my schedule. He thought he understood me. He had no idea that I had already driven to the lake house before sunrise. The property looked exactly the way I loved it. The water was perfectly still. A pair of ducks floated quietly near the dock. The breeze carried the scent of pine trees through the open windows. Standing on the deck, it was almost impossible to imagine 32 people filling every room with noise. I walked through the house one final time. Every bedroom, every bathroom, every closet. Not because I was preparing for guests, because I was saying goodbye to the illusion that this place had ever been respected by my family. Around noon, Donna from Lakeside Property Management arrived with 2 technicians. "Everything ready?" she asked. "Almost." The technicians inspected every exterior camera, tested each smart lock, and synchronized the system with the new administrator credentials. Every entrance now required authorization that only I possessed. Garage doors, front gate, boat dock, storage building, everything. One technician smiled as he handed back my tablet. "If someone tries the old codes, they'll simply fail." Exactly what I wanted. No confrontation, no warning, just silence. An hour later, another SUV pulled into the driveway. The private security supervisor introduced himself as Daniel Brooks, former law enforcement, calm, professional. He reviewed the property with remarkable efficiency. "How many people are we expecting?" 32 relatives, I answered. He raised one eyebrow but didn't ask any personal questions. "Do any of them have written permission to enter?" "No." "Will you be present?" "Nearby." He nodded once. "If they refuse to leave after being informed they're not authorized, we'll follow standard trespass procedures." Standard procedures. I appreciated those words. There was nothing emotional about what was about to happen. Nothing personal. Just procedures. Exactly as the law intended. After everyone left, I sat alone on the back deck, watching the afternoon sunlight dance across the lake. For the first time in years, I questioned whether I should simply cancel everything. Maybe I should send one final message. Maybe I should explain. Maybe someone would finally understand. Then another notification appeared. "Jason, don't forget to leave beer in the garage fridge." A second message followed almost immediately. "And move your car. We need room for everyone." Not "could you?" Not "would you mind?" Just another command. I laughed quietly. The moment of doubt disappeared. These people weren't making a mistake. They were revealing exactly who they had always been. I typed 3 words. "Have fun tomorrow." Within seconds, my mother replied. I knew you'd come around. Several cousins reacted with celebration emojis. Jason answered, Knew you wouldn't let us down. They misunderstood my message in exactly the way I expected. To them, cooperation was the only explanation. It never occurred to them that someone could remain perfectly polite while preparing consequences. As the sun began to disappear behind the trees, I locked the front door one final time and walked slowly toward my car. I paused halfway down the driveway. The house looked peaceful, untouched, safe. Tomorrow, that same driveway would be filled with SUVs, pickup trucks, coolers, folding chairs, children, dogs, and relatives convinced they were arriving for the best vacation of the summer. None of them knew that every camera was recording. None of them knew the access codes had already changed. None of them knew security had been instructed exactly how to respond. Most importantly, none of them realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't preparing to rescue my family from the consequences of their choices. I was preparing to let those consequences introduce themselves. Friday morning arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes people believe nothing can possibly go wrong. The sky was cloudless. The lake reflected the sunlight like polished glass. By 9:30, I was sitting inside a small coffee shop, less than a mile from the entrance to my neighborhood. My laptop was open in front of me, not because I was working, because every camera on my property streamed directly onto the screen. Daniel, the security supervisor, sat 2 tables away with a cup of black coffee. We had agreed that I would remain off the property unless absolutely necessary. This wasn't about creating a confrontation. It was about avoiding one. At exactly 9:56 a.m., the first SUV appeared on camera 1. My parents. My father's silver pickup followed closely behind. Within minutes, more vehicles rolled through the neighborhood. Minivans, pickup trucks, large SUVs with kayaks strapped to their roofs. Children jumped excitedly out of back seats before the engines had even stopped. Someone had even brought 2 golden retrievers. By 10:15, there were 11 vehicles lined up outside my front gate. Jason climbed out wearing mirrored sunglasses and carrying a fishing cooler over one shoulder. He looked like someone arriving at a resort. My mother stepped toward the electronic keypad with complete confidence. She entered the code she had been using for years. Nothing happened. She frowned, typed it again. Still nothing. I watched her glance toward my father. He walked over, muttering something I couldn't hear. He entered the exact same code. The keypad flashed red. Access denied. For the first time that morning, nobody smiled. Jason walked over. Move. He punched the buttons harder than necessary. Red light. Access denied. One of my cousins laughed. Claire probably changed it by accident. Another relative suggested calling me. Within seconds, my phone began vibrating across the coffee shop table. Mom calling. I let it ring. Dad calling. Ignored. Jason. Ignored. The family group chat exploded. Claire. Gate won't open. Answer your phone. I think the system is broken. I calmly closed every notification without reading further. Outside the gate, confusion slowly transformed into irritation. Several relatives climbed back into their vehicles because the summer heat was becoming unbearable. Children began asking when they could swim. Jason kicked the bottom of the gate hard enough to make the camera shake slightly. Daniel looked over from his table. You ready? I nodded. He calmly stood, adjusted his jacket, and drove toward the property with another security vehicle following behind. I stayed exactly where I was. Through camera 1, I watched both security SUVs stop in front of the entrance. Daniel stepped out first. Professional. Relaxed. Hands visible. He greeted my father politely. Although I couldn't hear every word, I knew the conversation almost by heart because we had rehearsed it the previous afternoon. Good morning. I'm with Lakeside Security. I'm here regarding unauthorized access to this private property. My father's posture changed immediately. He pointed toward the house, toward the dock, toward the relatives waiting behind him. He was explaining that this was his daughter's home, that they were family, that everything was fine. Daniel listened patiently before asking the only question that actually mattered. Do you have the owner's written authorization to enter? Silence. Jason stepped forward instead. We don't need permission. She's my sister. Daniel remained perfectly calm. Family relationship does not establish property access rights. Even from the camera feed, I could see Jason's expression harden. He spread both arms dramatically toward the crowd. 32 people drove all the way here. Daniel gave a small nod. I understand. That doesn't change ownership. My mother finally pulled out her phone again. This time she wasn't calling. She was recording, probably expecting to post a dramatic story later about unreasonable security guards. What she didn't realize was that 8 different cameras were already recording everything from far better angles. My father tried one final approach. This is a misunderstanding. Daniel answered with the same calm professionalism he had shown all morning. If it's a misunderstanding, the owner can resolve it by contacting us directly. He looked toward the waiting vehicles before continuing. Until then, no one is permitted beyond this gate. 32 relatives stood in complete silence. For the first time in their lives, being family wasn't enough to open someone else's door. People often imagine that legal consequences begin with handcuffs. Most of the time, they begin with paperwork. From the coffee shop, I watched my family continue arguing with Daniel through the camera feeds. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since they first arrived. The excitement that had filled the parking area earlier had disappeared. Children were growing restless. Several relatives sat inside their air-conditioned vehicles. Others gathered in small circles trying to decide what to do next. My father still believed he could solve everything by talking. Jason believed volume would accomplish what logic couldn't. Neither approach was working. Then my phone rang again. This time I answered. There was no greeting. What the hell are you doing? Jason shouted. I held the phone a few inches away from my ear. You embarrassed the entire family. I didn't do anything. Your security guards won't let us in. They're following instructions. They work for you. Yes. For a moment he said nothing. I could almost hear him trying to process the fact that I wasn't apologizing. Finally, he lowered his voice. Just call them and tell them we're allowed in. No. One simple word. The same word they had ignored for years because I rarely used it. Now they were hearing it without explanation, without negotiation, without guilt. What do you mean, no? I mean exactly that. My mother suddenly took the phone from him. Claire, sweetheart, enough of this. Her voice had changed completely. Gone were the commands. Gone was the certainty. Now she sounded patient, reasonable, as though this misunderstanding had appeared out of nowhere. Everyone drove so far. I know. The children are exhausted. I can see that. So tell security to open the gate. No. Silence. Then came the sentence I had expected my entire life. We're family. I looked at the live camera feed before answering. Yes. So why are you treating us like strangers? I watched Daniel standing calmly beside the entrance while Jason paced angrily behind him. You treated my property like it belonged to strangers. She inhaled sharply. What does that even mean? It means you invited 32 people to my house without asking me. We knew you'd say yes. You never asked. Because we didn't think we had to. There it was. The truth. Not hidden behind excuses. Not softened by emotion. Just spoken aloud as though it were perfectly normal. I ended the call. A minute later, Daniel's phone rang. He listened for a few seconds before walking a short distance away from the crowd. Mine rang immediately afterward. It's time, he said. They're demanding proof that you own the property. I'll send it. I opened the secure folder on my tablet and forwarded exactly 3 documents. The deed, the county tax record, a signed letter from my attorney confirming that no one had permission to occupy the property without my written consent. Less than a minute later, Daniel received them. Through the camera, I watched him calmly hand printed copies to my father. Dad glanced at the first page, then the second, then the attorney's letter. His shoulders visibly stiffened. Jason grabbed the papers before his father could finish reading them. He barely looked at the first page before crumpling the letter in one hand. This doesn't matter. Daniel remained perfectly composed. Actually, it does. It's just paperwork. Ownership is established through paperwork. Jason threw the crumpled pages onto the hood of his truck. I'm her brother. Daniel nodded politely. The documents identify the owner. They do not identify authorized guests. For the first time that day, several relatives stepped away from Jason instead of toward him. An aunt quietly picked up the scattered papers. She smoothed the pages against the hood and began reading them herself. Another uncle leaned over her shoulder. Whispers spread through the crowd. She owns it herself? Completely? I thought Richard bought this place. So did I. No mortgage with the parents? I guess not. The story my parents had told everyone for years was beginning to unravel. Not because I exposed them, because official documents quietly contradicted every assumption they had built their authority upon. I watched my father's face lose its confidence one expression at a time. He wasn't looking at the house anymore. He wasn't looking at the gate. He was staring at the signature on the deed. Mine. For the first time since this began, he wasn't confronting his daughter. He was confronting undeniable proof that everything beyond that locked gate had always belonged to someone he no longer controlled. The crowd changed after the documents appeared. Until then, everyone had believed they were participating in a minor family disagreement. Now they understood they were standing outside someone else's private property without permission. The difference was subtle, but you could see it. People who had been laughing an hour earlier suddenly stopped making eye contact. Several cousins quietly loaded folding chairs back into their trucks. One aunt gathered the coolers she had already unloaded onto the pavement. Nobody announced they were leaving. They simply started preparing for the possibility. Jason refused to notice. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, pacing in front of the locked gate. He pointed toward Daniel. "You can't keep us out forever." Daniel's expression never changed. "I'm not attempting to keep anyone here. You are free to leave whenever you choose." The simplicity of that answer only made Jason angrier. My father stepped between them. "This is getting out of hand." Daniel nodded politely. "I agree. So open the gate." "I can't. You work here." "I work for the property owner." That sentence seemed to echo through the entire parking area. Not the family. Not the parents. Not the oldest generation. The property owner. A title my family had spent years pretending belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't one of my relatives. It was my attorney. "I've reviewed the live updates Daniel sent." "So have I. Everything has remained peaceful." "Yes. If that changes, security knows exactly what to do." "I know." There was a brief pause. "You handled this correctly, Claire." Those 4 words surprised me more than anything else that morning. Not because I needed approval, because I realized how rarely anyone had ever said them to me. Growing up, doing the right thing usually meant sacrificing something. My money, my time, my plans, my peace. Today, doing the right thing meant protecting something instead. Outside, another argument was beginning. One of my uncles approached my father holding the attorney's letter. "Richard." His voice was low, but the microphones near the gate picked it up clearly. "Did Claire really never agree to this?" Dad hesitated. We knew she'd be fine with it." "That's not what I asked." Another silence. Longer this time. "I guess we didn't actually ask." Those words spread through the crowd faster than shouting ever could. People looked at one another. Some frowned. Others looked embarrassed. A few quietly shook their heads. The story had changed. It was no longer about an ungrateful daughter ruining a family vacation. It was about 32 adults discovering they had accepted an invitation from someone who had no authority to give one. Jason tried to seize control again. "Everyone relax." He forced a smile that looked more strained every second. "We'll get inside." He marched toward the side fence. I immediately saw him on camera 3. He studied the fence for several seconds before placing one foot on the bottom rail. Daniel spoke before Jason could climb. "Sir." Jason looked back. "If you attempt to enter the property by climbing the fence or bypassing the gate, I will immediately contact law enforcement regarding criminal trespass." "You wouldn't." "I would. I'm family. The law doesn't distinguish between relatives and strangers once access has been denied." Jason stepped back onto the ground. His confidence cracked for the first time. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of consequences that didn't disappear simply because he raised his voice. My mother began crying. Not dramatically, quietly. She sat inside the passenger seat of my father's truck, staring at the locked gate through the windshield. Several relatives gathered around her. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. I thought Claire invited everyone. So did we. This is humiliating. We drove 4 hours. No one checked with her? One uncomfortable question led naturally to another. No one had, because for years, everyone had accepted the same unwritten rule. If Claire owned it, the family could use it. If Claire paid for it, someone else decided how. If Claire objected, she would eventually give in. Today was the first exception. Daniel's radio crackled softly. He acknowledged the message before looking once more at my father. "I'll give everyone another few minutes to gather their belongings." My father looked around at the disappointed faces surrounding him. The children, the coolers, the packed trucks, the relatives avoiding his eyes. For years, he had been the man who made decisions for everyone else. Now 32 people were waiting for him to explain why none of them could even step through the front gate. And for the first time in my life, he had no explanation that anyone was willing to believe. By early afternoon, the parking area outside my gate was almost empty. One vehicle at a time, my relatives drove away. No dramatic speeches. No final arguments. Just quiet departures that felt heavier than shouting ever could. An uncle gave Daniel a polite nod before climbing into his truck. One cousin apologized for the misunderstanding, even though she had never spoken to me directly. Several others simply avoided looking toward the house. The vacation they had spent weeks planning had ended without anyone stepping onto the property. Only 3 vehicles remained. My parents', Jason's, and Daniel's security SUV. I finally left the coffee shop. When I arrived, I parked on the opposite side of the road. Not inside the gate, outside it, exactly where everyone else had been standing all morning. The moment my parents saw me, they walked over. Jason followed a few steps behind. His face was red with frustration. My mother spoke first. "You actually came." I said I would. She looked toward the locked gate. "Please." It was the first time I could remember hearing that word from her when she wanted something from me. "Can we just talk?" "We're talking now." She glanced around. "Not here." "Here is fine." My father cleared his throat. "This has gone far enough." I waited. He expected me to rescue him from the silence. I didn't. Finally, he continued. "You've embarrassed the family." I looked past him toward the nearly empty road. "I didn't invite them. You didn't have to do this publicly. You made it public when you invited 32 people." Jason stepped forward again. "You ruined everything over a stupid house." I met his eyes. "No. I protected my home. It's just property." I smiled slightly. "If it's just property, why were you so desperate to get inside?" For the first time all day, Jason had no answer. My mother tried one last appeal. "We're your parents." "I know. We sacrificed so much for you." I thought about the years I had paid Jason's debts, the vacations I had funded, the holidays I had organized, the emergencies I had quietly solved, the promotions I celebrated alone because nobody asked about my work. Then I thought about one sentence from the group chat. "It's Claire. She never complains." They had mistaken my generosity for obligation, my silence for permission, my love for surrender. "I'm grateful for everything you gave me growing up," I said calmly. "But adulthood doesn't erase ownership." My father looked exhausted. "So what happens now?" The answer came easier than I expected. "Now, You ask before using something that belongs to someone else. You accept the answer. And if the answer is no, you respect it. Nobody spoke. The lesson was painfully simple. That was probably why it had taken them so long to learn it. Jason shook his head. You've changed. Yes, I have. It wasn't an insult. It was the truest thing he had said all day. I had changed. Not because I became colder. Because I finally stopped confusing peace with surrender. Daniel walked over one last time. Everything resolved? I nodded. Thank you. He smiled politely before returning to his vehicle. Within minutes, he was gone. My parents slowly walked back to their truck. My mother looked at the lake one final time through the iron gate. Then she climbed inside without another word. Jason slammed his truck door hard enough to echo across the water. 3 engines started. 3 vehicles drove away. The road became quiet again. I entered the new access code. The gate opened smoothly. As I drove inside, it closed gently behind me. No applause. No celebration. Just silence. The kind of silence I had been trying to protect from the very beginning. That evening, I sat alone on the dock with a cup of coffee as the sun disappeared beyond the trees. The lake was perfectly still, exactly as it had been before any messages arrived. My phone buzzed once. The family group chat had been renamed. No more vacation plans. No more demands. Only one new message. My father. We should have asked. I looked at the words for a long moment. Then I locked my phone and placed it beside me. Some apologies don't erase the past, but they acknowledge the truth. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't watching someone lose. It's refusing to lose yourself ever again. That weekend, my lake house remained exactly what I had worked so hard to make it. Not a free resort. Not a family entitlement. Just my home. And for the first time in my adult life, everyone finally understood the difference. People assume the story ended when the gate closed. Didn't. Real change rarely announces itself in a single dramatic moment. It arrives quietly, one decision at a time. The Monday after the lake house incident, I returned to work. My inbox was full. Security assessments, client meetings, a proposal for a new consulting contract. Nothing in my professional life had changed. That felt strangely comforting. For years, I had separated my career from my family because I believed success would eventually earn their respect. Now I understood something different. Respect that depends on what you give someone is never really respect. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Not a call. An email. From my father. The subject line read only 3 words. I was wrong. I stared at it for several seconds before opening it. The message wasn't long. He admitted they had assumed my lake house belonged to the entire family simply because I had never objected before. He admitted inviting everyone without asking had been wrong. He admitted that he should never have expected me to pay for another family vacation. There were no excuses. No mention of Jason. No attempt to blame my mother. Just ownership. I didn't reply immediately. Some conversations deserve time instead of emotion. Later that week, Michael Harrison called. I wanted to let you know everything has been officially documented. The security reports? Yes. And because no trespass actually occurred, the matter is considered resolved. Good. You handled this exactly the way we hope clients handle these situations. I laughed softly. I never wanted a legal case. I know. You wanted a boundary. He was right. The law had never been my weapon. It had simply been the fence around something that already belonged to me. A few days later, Donna from Lakeside Property Management sent me copies of the maintenance reports. The new camera system had worked perfectly. The smart locks had performed without a single error. She added one handwritten note at the bottom. Your home is beautiful. I'm glad it stayed protected. I smiled before filing the report away. Saturday morning, I drove back to the lake. This time there were no unexpected vehicles. No coolers. No arguments. Only birds gliding across the water and wind moving gently through the trees. I unlocked the front door. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The living room, the kitchen, the photographs on the walls. Nothing had been disturbed. For years, I thought peace meant keeping everyone else happy. Standing inside my own home, I finally understood that peace begins when you stop abandoning yourself. I carried a cup of coffee onto the deck overlooking the lake. The sunrise reflected across the water exactly as it had the day I signed the closing documents years earlier. Back then, I believed I had bought a vacation house. Now I realized I had built something much more valuable. A place where my choices mattered. A place where my voice carried equal weight to my kindness. Weeks passed. Family gatherings became smaller, quieter. When invitations arrived, they included one sentence I had never seen before. Let us know if you're available. Not, we're coming. Not, you'll take care of it. Just a question. It seemed insignificant. It wasn't. Questions acknowledge another person's right to choose. One evening, my father called again. This time, our conversation lasted only a few minutes. Before hanging up, he said something I had waited decades to hear. We'll ask next time. I believed him, not because of his words, because he had finally experienced the consequences of ignoring them. As the seasons changed, I found myself visiting the lake house more often, sometimes with friends, sometimes completely alone. I discovered that solitude wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. Freedom from explaining. Freedom from apologizing. Freedom from carrying responsibilities that had never truly belonged to me. Looking back, people might say the story was about a lake house. It never was. The house was only the place where the truth became impossible to ignore. The real victory wasn't protecting a piece of property. It was protecting the woman who had worked for every brick, every payment, every quiet dream that stood behind that locked gate. And that was something no one would ever be allowed to claim without my permission again. About 6 months later, Thanksgiving arrived. For most of my adult life, that holiday had followed the same pattern. My mother planned the menu. My father decided who was invited. Jason arrived late. I paid for whatever had been forgotten. Without anyone discussing it, those roles had become permanent. This year was different. The invitation arrived by email. Not a group message. Not an announcement. An invitation. Claire, we'd love for you to join us if you're available. The smallest word in the sentence carried the greatest weight. For the first time, attendance was my decision instead of my obligation. I accepted. Not because everything had been repaired. Because I wanted to see whether anything had truly changed. When I arrived at my parents' house, the driveway was already full. Inside, familiar voices filled the living room. Several relatives smiled when they saw me. One aunt hugged me. I'm glad you came. So am I. No one mentioned the lake house. Not immediately. Dinner was quieter than I remembered. People actually listened when someone else spoke. Conversations overlapped naturally instead of turning into competitions. It wasn't perfect. Families rarely are. But it felt healthier. Halfway through the meal, my mother stood. Before dessert, she said softly, I'd like to say something. The room became silent. She looked at me. I owe Claire an apology. Nobody interrupted. For years, I confused being close to someone with having the right to decide for them. She paused. I taught Jason that asking wasn't necessary because family should automatically share. Her voice trembled slightly. I was wrong. The room remained completely still. She wasn't performing. There were no dramatic tears. No attempt to make herself the victim. Just simple accountability. My father nodded. So was I. He looked around the table. We expected Claire to carry responsibilities we never asked Jason to carry. That sentence landed harder than either of them realized. Jason lowered his eyes. For once, he didn't interrupt. One of my cousins quietly said, We all assumed the same thing. Another nodded. I honestly thought your parents owned the lake house. So did I. I never asked. Listening to them, I realized something important. Entitlement spreads quietly. One assumption becomes another. Eventually, no one remembers where the story began. Jason finally cleared his throat. I owe you one too. Everyone looked toward him. I always thought He stopped, searching for the words. I thought whatever you had would always be available. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. I never even questioned it. Neither had I. Not until I finally said no. I'm sorry. The apology was awkward, incomplete, but genuine. I accepted it for exactly what it was. Not payment for the past. Simply the beginning of something different. After dinner, several relatives helped clean the kitchen. Nobody disappeared into the living room. Nobody assumed someone else would do the work. When I reached for a stack of plates, my mother gently stopped me. We've got this. I smiled. I can help. You can. She handed me one dish towel instead of the entire kitchen. That tiny gesture almost made me laugh. For years, helping had meant doing everything. Now it meant sharing. Later that evening, I stood on the back porch with my father. Cold autumn air drifted through the trees. After a long silence, he spoke. I keep thinking about that gate. So do I. I was angry that day. I know. I thought you were shutting us out. I looked toward the dark backyard. I wasn't. I was closing one door, so another one could finally have a lock. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. When I drove home that night, I realized forgiveness had never been my goal. Neither had revenge. What I truly wanted was something much simpler. To be treated like an adult whose choices mattered. The lake house had forced that conversation. Not because it changed my family overnight, but because it made the old rules impossible to continue. Some stories end when the villain loses. Mine ended when everyone finally learned that love without respect eventually becomes control. And respect always begins with one simple question. May I? Everything else follows from the answer. The following summer, I unlocked the gate before sunrise. The familiar click echoed across the quiet lake. A year earlier, that sound had meant something entirely different. Back then, it represented a boundary my family refused to recognize. Now it simply meant I was home. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh water. Mist floated gently above the lake, softening the shoreline until it almost disappeared into the morning light. I carried a folding chair to the dock with a cup of coffee in one hand and a novel in the other. For nearly an hour, I didn't open the book. I simply watched the water. Peace has a sound. It isn't complete silence. It's birds calling across the trees. Small waves touching the dock. Wind moving through leaves. It's the absence of waiting for the next crisis. That was the greatest gift I had given myself. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Jason. Are you at the lake today? A year ago, I would have expected another demand to follow. Instead, the next message arrived. If you are, would it be okay if I stopped by for an hour? Would it be okay? I smiled. Not because the words erased everything that had happened. Because they proved something had changed. I replied, sure. Come by around 2. His answer arrived almost immediately. Thanks. Nothing else. No assumptions. No announcements. Just gratitude. At exactly 2 o'clock, his truck stopped outside the gate. He didn't honk. He didn't try the old access code. He didn't call demanding to be let in. He waited. I walked to the entrance and opened the gate myself. He stepped out carrying a small cooler. I brought lunch. You didn't have to. I wanted to. We spent the afternoon fishing from the dock. Mostly in silence. Eventually, Jason laughed. I used to think this place belonged to all of us. I know. I honestly believed that. I know. He looked across the water. I never realized how much work it took for you to build all of this. You weren't supposed to. What do you mean? I never bought this house so anyone would admire me. I bought it because I wanted one place where my life belonged entirely to me. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. And for the first time, I believed he truly did. When he left that afternoon, he gathered every empty bottle, every wrapper, every piece of fishing line. Before driving away, he asked one final question. Can I come back sometime? I smiled. Just ask. I will. After he disappeared down the road, I closed the gate again. Not to keep people out, but to remind myself that choosing who comes in is part of protecting what matters. Later that evening, my parents arrived. Not unexpectedly. We had planned dinner together 2 weeks earlier. My mother carried homemade pie. My father brought firewood. Neither of them walked toward the house until I unlocked the gate. Neither reached for the keypad. Neither assumed. As we ate on the deck overlooking the lake, conversation drifted easily from work to travel, from old memories to future plans. No one mentioned ownership. No one needed to. Respect had quietly replaced entitlement. As the sun began to set, my father looked toward the shoreline. "You know," he said, "this place feels different now." I looked at the golden reflection stretching across the water. "It is. Because of the renovations?" I shook my head. "No, because everyone inside it actually belongs here." He smiled softly. "I suppose that's true." When darkness settled across the lake, we lit a small fire near the dock. The flames reflected gently on the water. For years, I had believed family meant enduring whatever people expected from you. Now I understood something far healthier. Family isn't measured by how much you can take from one another. It's measured by how carefully you protect each other's dignity. The lake house hadn't changed. The walls were the same. The dock was the same. The trees surrounding the shoreline were the same. The only thing that had truly changed was the invisible boundary everyone had finally learned to respect. And somehow that made the entire place feel bigger than it ever had before. A few years have passed since the day 32 relatives stood outside my locked gate believing they had every right to enter. Sometimes people ask me if I regret saying no. The answer has never changed. No. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. Every summer now, I spend a few weeks at the lake house. Some weekends, friends visit. Sometimes my parents come for dinner. Occasionally, Jason joins me for a morning of fishing. Every visit begins exactly the same way. Someone asks first. That simple habit has become part of our family without anyone talking about it. The gate still stands where it always has. The cameras are still there. The smart locks still work. None of those things exist because I expect another confrontation. They remain because boundaries are easier to maintain than they are to rebuild. One afternoon, while organizing old files in my home office, I found the folder Michael Harrison had prepared during the dispute. Inside were copies of the property deed, security reports, emails, the attorney's letter, even screenshots from the family group chat. I read through them one final time. Then I closed the folder. I carried it to the filing cabinet. Not because I wanted to forget, because I no longer needed to relive it. The evidence had served its purpose. It had protected my home. More importantly, it had protected my confidence. Later that evening, I drove to the lake. The sunset painted the water in shades of gold and deep orange. I walked slowly onto the dock, stopping at the very end. This had become my favorite place. Not because it was expensive. Not because it was beautiful. Although it certainly was. It mattered because every board beneath my feet represented years of work, sacrifice, and choices I had made for myself. No one had given me this life. No one had handed me the keys. I earned them. That realization still filled me with quiet pride. As darkness settled across the lake, my phone vibrated. A family group message. My mother had written only one sentence. "Who's available for dinner next Sunday?" The replies appeared one after another. "I can make it. Not this week. Maybe next time." Then Jason added something that made me smile. "Claire, if you're free, would you like to host at the lake sometime later this summer?" Absolutely no pressure. I looked at the message for a long moment. Years ago, the invitation would have been written very differently. "We're coming. There will be 32 people. Don't forget the boat." Now there was only a question, and complete acceptance that the answer might be no. I typed my reply. "Yes. Let's keep it small. 6 people. I'll send the date." Within seconds, my father answered. "Sounds perfect. No negotiations. No extra invitations. No assumptions. Just agreement." I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked across the calm water. The lake reflected the stars so clearly that the horizon almost disappeared. I remembered the frightened version of myself who had stared at that first text message from my mother. "You really think you can stop us?" At the time, I wasn't completely sure. Not because I doubted the law, because I had spent so many years believing that protecting myself somehow made me selfish. I know better now. Healthy love doesn't demand unlimited access. It doesn't confuse generosity with obligation. It doesn't punish someone for having boundaries. Real family doesn't ask you to disappear so everyone else can feel comfortable. It makes room for you to stand beside them as an equal. If there is one lesson this lake house taught me, it has nothing to do with real estate, security systems, or legal documents. Those were only tools. The real lesson is that every relationship becomes healthier the moment respect replaces entitlement. Sometimes that change begins with one difficult conversation. Sometimes it begins with one locked gate. For me, it began with a single word. No. And surprisingly, that one word opened the door to a life filled with more peace than I ever imagined possible. The lake remained quiet beneath the evening sky. I finished my coffee, locked the front door behind me, turned off the lights, and drove home knowing that the greatest thing I had ever protected was never the house itself. It was the life I had finally given myself permission to live.